I never felt like the 160th was fun. It was not fun. It was hard. It was stressful. It was white knuckle flying, and the expectations were high. The margin of error was next to none. It was high adventure, high stress, high anxiety a lot of the time.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest is a retired lieutenant colonel. He is a proud distinguished military graduate from Jacksonville State University, where he earned his commission as an Army aviation officer in 2000. Before that, he served 3 years in the Marine Corps Reserve. Over 2 decades in the Army, he soared through leadership roles, from leading attack helicopter platoons in Iraq to commanding special operation units in Afghanistan. He even took a break from the action to inspire future leaders as a professor of military science in New York. His career highlights include multiple combat deployments, working with elite operations teams, accumulating as the 260th SOAR Airborne Battalion Commander. Today, he owns and operates the Chick-fil-A in Northern Virginia community near the airport. So clearly, whether it's the air, the battlefield, behind the counter, he is always on a mission to lead and serve. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Athanasakis. Michael, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
It's my pleasure, Gina. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I mean, I think it's really interesting that you have, well, first of all, you are the third Night Stalker on the show, but the second that flew the planes. Okay, that was a pilot. We had Brandon Parrish on the show. If any of you guys had not checked out Brandon's episode and listened to it, I highly, highly recommend it. It was amazing. He's also a Night Stalker. And we're actually going to dive a little bit deep into some stories that he gave us. But I want to talk about your journey first. I want to talk about, like, you know, you went into the reserves, you picked the Marine Corps first. So I want to know what drew you to the military. Was that part of the plan, like going into the reserves? Why the Marines?
Growing up, I wouldn't say it was part of the plan. I would say that, I definitely had a propensity to serve. A little bit different story than Brandon. You know, I grew up on the East Coast in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and we moved to Stratford, one town over, when I was in 8th grade. But that's a very kind of urban area. I always tell people Bridgeport, think of like Baltimore, if you will, to kind of set the stage for the environment. Grew up very working class, if you will. My dad's a Greek immigrant. My stepfather came from overseas as well. I went to public schools, and then I had an opportunity to go to a prep school, essentially on this financial aid package to play football at the Canterbury School in New Milford, Connecticut. And when I was finishing up my postgraduate year there, we were really successful. You know, we were New England champions, all New England football team. I was getting recruited by some schools for football and not major colleges for scholarship, but I started to need some money for school to help package the financial package together that they provided me. And so I started looking into the reserves. You know, I looked into the Marine Corps Reserve and was really excited about that opportunity. And I was an infantryman in the Marine Reserve. So I went down that path. Folks will say, how did you end up in the Army? Well, I ended up in the Army. I had originally wanted to be a Marine Corps aviator, but at the time, I don't have 20/20 vision, and my vision has since gotten worse over time. And so at the time, the Army was one of the first services to have the opportunity, if you had no worse than 20/40 vision, correctable to 20/20. So I transitioned from the Marine Corps Reserves to Army ROTC. And unlike the Marines, if you can meet the criteria, they guarantee you aviation. The Army doesn't guarantee you aviation. You have to meet the criteria and perform because it's a sought after career field. And, you know, I was this Marine reservist and I was cocky and confident that I could do well in the Army ROTC program, which I did, and get selected for aviation, which I did. So I didn't, unlike Brandon, I didn't go to the United States Military Academy at West Point. I went to a very mid-tier state university for Army ROTC.
Did you feel like that confidence really helped you in terms of, you know, I mean, because you said it's not guaranteed, but you didn't allow that to deter you, but then, you know, you were pretty confident about that.
I would say it was more naivete than and immaturity than confidence in that, like, well, been this enlisted Marine in the reserves. Surely I can go to Army ROTC. And then when you get there, you realize like, wow, all military services, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, produce exceptional leaders and exceptional officers. And so it motivated me when I got around high performers to want to high perform as well. I will share the story. I was a bit of a late bloomer, if you will, especially when it comes to academics. And so I remember talking to the ROTC recruiter at Jacksonville State University in Alabama, where I was going to school. He said to me, well, what are you interested in doing? And I was like, well, I'd really like to be an aviator. And he kind of like scoffed a little bit. And he was a captain. And at the time, they don't have captains now. They have civilians that do it. But he was an Army captain at the time. He was an armor officer. And I was kind of taken back a bit. And he goes, well, like you don't really have essentially a background or profile for that. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you have a 2.4 GPA because I transferred in from a school in the Northeast. And he was like, hey, this is kind of like the profile of folks who get selected for Army aviation. I really busted my hump. The physical aspect wasn't a problem. I was very physically fit. So I really busted my hump academically. And so by the time I graduated, I had a 3.3 GPA. That doesn't blow you away either. It's still a strong GPA, but from where I was and what I had to raise it to, I literally had to make like the dean's list every semester from that point on just to get to that point. They do this thing called advanced camp. At West Point, they'll do Buckner and different summer courses, but in the Army, they do basic camp, advanced camp, and I was at advanced camp. And that's kind of like a big delineator of like your future, how you perform there. And so I was the Distinguished Regimental Honor Graduate. And so that meant I was ranked number one of 800 cadets that went through that cycle. That propelled me to one of the top cadets in the nation standing. Even though my GPA wasn't on the other side of 3.5, I had performed so well there. I was in the top 10%, and I was actually one of the top 10 cadets in the nation that year. And so what that allowed me to do was they were like, essentially, you can pick any job you want. And I was like, well, I want to be an Army aviator. And a lot of that was coming from the background I grew up in. I had a single mom for a long time. It was just a really rough environment for us economically as well. It was a little bit of a chip on my shoulder that I wanted to prove myself. And I felt that aviation was the proving ground for that, to show folks, hey, I am intelligent, I am smart, and I can work hard and I can achieve on this level. To say like, hey, I always grew up wanting to be an aviator, I wouldn't say that's true. It was definitely an opportunity for me to prove my mettle.
That's incredible. Would you say like that was like your first real test for like mental toughness in terms of, or it didn't have to be physical, sometimes when we think of that, we think physical, right? We're not thinking about the academic part, the whole round of it all, and did you find like that was your biggest like real wake up, or was there another experience for you?
No, I mean, my upbringing as a kid, latchkey kid. I mean, when I say like, mom on state assistance, inner city, all that stuff, that really instilled kind of like a grit, a toughness, and a street smarts into me. But I was still very much this unrefined, unfinished product. But I had grit and I had a hardiness and a determination that got married together on the military side, that training to be an officer on the ROTC side. I will say that I did feel a little bit behind academically, like when I started flight school, where a lot of my friends they had just had a better academic pedigree, whether they had went to West Point or they were, a STEM student at a university they were at. I found myself spending a lot of time in the tech library studying. When my friends would go down to Destin for the weekend, I'd be like, well, I got to kind of stay and brush up on some things. But I think my upbringing and my background, when I talk about the grittiness, the hardiness of growing up where I grew up, that provided the basis of that mindset of like, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to get through this and I'm never going to quit. I'm never going to give up. And if somebody wants to like kick me out, they can, but I'm not leaving.
I really resonate with that last line, like, they could kick me out, but I'm not leaving. You really had that drive. So when you had that opportunity then to go the aviation route, were there struggles along the way, and how did you overcome those to, become, and how did you end up going Night Stalker?
When you say struggles, like, I think I had like a lot of raw innate leadership But when you're in flight school, you're just kind of like this STEMmy kind of flight schooly student. Like your leadership doesn't really play into much and everything. So I was an average middle of the road flight school student. Like I wasn't the worst in my class. I wasn't the top of my class. I was kind of academically, and I was a middle of the road student with a lot of hard work. So it wasn't just I was middle of the road and I accepted that. Like I was studying, I was working hard. So I never felt like, hey, I'm not going to graduate flight school. There were times where like, am I going to find the hover button that they say that you eventually find? Like I'm not hovering this thing and then you finally do. So I really excelled when I got to a unit, because then when you got to a unit, you're a lieutenant, you're a platoon leader, and folks got to see my like kind of raw talent of just caring for individuals, caring for my soldiers, caring for and I think that made like instructor pilots and other folks go like, we want to invest in this kid because he's kind of raw on the flight side, but man, he's a pretty decent leader and he takes care of folks pretty well. And if we could make him a better pilot, he'll do pretty well in the Army. So I think I was able to leverage the EQ side of it once I got into units and out of flight school.
Where did you learn that caring side? Because a lot of people, especially in the very beginning, you have an objective, you have a goal, and yes, you want to assist and help people at time, but like you also need to focus on you. Like we're mainly a lot of us, and I could speak for myself, like when I was younger, like I had a direction and I had a path, and I was very involved in me, right? Whereas where does the whole like caring for others and stuff like that come in for you?
Fortunately for me, even with my struggles and like I was kind of a troubled youth. So I want to paint that picture. Like I didn't grow up in this kind of nurturing, caring kind of home. I was in and out of trouble. I spent some time in the juvenile system. Like I'm being, fully unfiltered here with you. And I never forget, I was always a bigger, stronger kid, maybe a little bit on the awkward side, but just big and strong because I didn't really know my place or found my place yet. And I never forget, I'm going to use first names, not last names, but we had a kind of renowned high school football coach, and his name was Walt. And he kind of was in the hallway at the end of my freshman year, and he's like, "Hey, you, come here." He was like, "You need to show up at the field house at this time tomorrow. Spring football starting, and you're going to play football." And I don't know if somebody encouraged him to seek me out, or he just saw me in the hallway and said, "This kid's a big, strong kid, kind of a goofball, but let me get my hands wrapped around him." And then our assistant coach, Dirk. And through that, I started to find really good friends for the first time with really good, caring families. And so I often tell people I was raised by like my friends' families, whether it was Mark, called him Mook, whether it was Ray, whether it was Tom, they all had great, caring families who like probably saw a little bit of my upbringing and what was going on. And fortunately for me, they liked me and they saw through some of the rough edges and they were like, "Hey, invite Mike over. Or, hey, bring Mike over." I would go on like family vacations with Tom and his family, and they almost became like a surrogate second family. So I saw a lot of care through other people through that lens as an early age. And it was just something that stuck with me. I was always real grateful for it as I started to achieve and I got older. And I was just always willing to be a little bit more caring towards others and invest in others, just because of the positive experiences I got from it. That's a part of it, and just how impactful it was for me, and maybe trying to be caring and impactful for others along the way.
I definitely want to revisit this when we go into the where you are right now and how that I'm sure you apply that into your employees and everything, because I just know for myself, like I used to work in restaurants when I was younger. I had a end state for myself. Like that was not my end all be all. It was like I was there to pay my bills, but I was working on my career when I wasn't there. So like you didn't really care about the job that much. But when I had a boss that cared about me and that showed their employees that, like whether I wanted to be there or not was irrelevant. Like I wanted to work hard for you because you were like a really nice person and cared about me. Whereas I worked in restaurants where like they didn't care about you at all. And because I didn't want to be there in the first place, like like it just made me not want to care further. And I don't know how it is for you. Like in Chick-fil-A, but I know that some people are there for careers and some people are there for summer jobs. And I would actually, let's just get into it real quick and then we'll go circle back. Like, how do you apply that to your employees? Do you have employees that are like there for a short time and then go to school and then maybe come back with you? Or how does that work for you in terms of your philosophy of that caring, and now you're in this leadership role?
So yes, all of the above. I would tell you what drew me to Chick-fil-A was the ability to impact on that level. When you enter the process to become a Chick-fil-A owner operator, franchisee, if you will, you'll get asked. I tell people I got asked, it seems like no less than 100 times by any time I had a contact with anyone from Chick-fil-A through the selection process or fellow operators or operators at the time or folks who were at the support center, they always would lead with this: why do you want to be a Chick-fil-A operator? And for me, it was very clear. Like, I wanted to be partnered with a company that shared the same passions and values that I had. I wanted to be partnered with a company that knew what they were for, not just what they do, right? Because what Chick-fil-A does is chicken, but what they're for is so much more. I wanted to be a contributing, viable, caring member of my community, my local restaurant community, for our guests and the surrounding community. I wanted to build and grow and develop a team. I enjoyed that. That's what I really enjoyed about the Army. Less about the flying, more about that. And frankly, I wanted to make a great income, a great living for my family and I. I want to put my kids in a safe environment, safe schools, and just to afford them the opportunity in a different path that maybe I didn't have growing up. And so that was all very important to me. And at Chick-fil-A, I have close to 100 employees, team members, we call them. And some of them are professional team members, adults that'll stay with me, and they're in leadership positions, directors, executive directors, GMs, they're compensated well. Some are young high schoolers, some are college students. We generally do a pretty good job of retention as far as the sector goes, the quick service food sector goes compared to others, but we still have turnover. But yes, will I get the high schooler that thinks they're just coming for their first job and they're going to make a little bit of money? And I will tell you that they find that it is so much more, to the point that I don't spend a lot of time hiring just summer help, because the summer hires I have, they're my high schoolers that go off to college and they come back in the summer, because I really can't affect and pour into someone and grow into someone and get the effects I'm looking for them or the business in just a couple months over the summer. So my summer help, if you will, are folks that have been with me a while, and they're the high schoolers that are now sophomores in college that are coming back to work over the summer. In Chick-fil-A, there's lots of paths, whether you grow up as a leader in the restaurant and you do that for a career, whether you grow up, you start in the restaurant and you grow up and you go work at the support center in a corporate role, or you join the leadership development program and you become a Chick-fil-A, go down the path, become a Chick-fil-A franchisee and owner operator. There's so many different paths, but it starts with care. I think my team would tell you that, like, if you ask them, does Mike care about you? They would say yes. We spend and invest our resources on our development of our team, on travel for our team, on professional development for our team. So I sent 13 folks from my store to the Ascend program at Chick-fil-A. And that's an investment that I have to make, a monetary investment that I have to make, but it just brings so much more back to our business. And they go down and they get treated like kings and queens for 3 days down at Chick-fil-A, and they stay in a beautiful hotel, and they really learn the heart of Chick-fil-A, the core four, which is, the hospitality part. They grow from it. Obviously, the business grows from it, but I don't view investments in people as a line item on my profit and loss statement. I view it as an investment in them and in the business. And in return, we get, like, to your point, we get some great retention. We get people who really want to work really hard for us. They see a path for them. I share with you, I had one of my leaders, Marcus, a young leader, and he wrote me a note after he got back from the training. And he said, Mike, I just want you to know that I was actually considering leaving and looking for another job. And after I went to Ascend and after I came back, and I saw what you were trying to do, what the restaurant was all about, it's like, I really want to stay and grow with you and maybe have a long-term path with Chick-fil-A, either inside or outside the restaurant. And that's just an anecdotal story, but you get a lot of those. And I would say I'm no different than any other Chick-fil-A operator in that regard. There's some things that make Chick-fil-A special, and I don't want to belabor or get too long-winded, but I'll kind of draw this parallel. You know, in the unit, in the 160th, we would say touching the magic. There's something about the regiment and touching the magic. And I will tell you, there's something about Chick-fil-A and touching the magic that is uniquely different and is a different experience for folks.
You said something really interesting that not many business owners or that I've really come across do. And for you, it's you invest in your team, right? And you mentioned like you really loved the team, you know, part of being in the military, right? And you really wanted that in civilian life as well. And, you know, sometimes it's really hard to find that, right? It's hard to find those people. What what makes a good team, right? How did you learn about building a team and developing a team in the military that then again translates to you being successful owning and operating Chick-fil-A?
In the military, folks are attracted to service for different reasons, but by and large, right, the folks were propensity to serve. And in the 160th, it was really special. And I spent about 10 years in the 160th, a decade in the 160th. You're specially selected into that unit. So you get folks with a certain kind of makeup, a certain kind of personality makeup, and you inculcate them in this environment. And it just becomes like a self-licking ice cream cone at some point because you get, and I don't want to say groupthink, but you do want folks who are like-minded in a way and mission-focused in a way. And it's no different at Chick-fil-A. You're looking for folks that have a propensity to serve because we serve others, that are mission-oriented, that are somewhat like-minded, and they can all look different and be different, but we're looking for personality and character traits. And for me, I have this acronym that I created called C3I, and it's, you know, compassion, character, competence, and integrity. I'm looking for those things when I'm interviewing folks. And it's not that you're going to find that in one interview, but do you have enough of an indicator that you're willing to give that person a try and see how they work out? And some do and some don't. But by and large, we've been getting it right and refining that. You get them in this environment, right, where they're all together, and now you have 100 different people in the restaurant, and you kind of inculcate them into your culture. And you'd be surprised how, I don't want to say how easy it is, but how quickly folks can make that shift. You know, I use an example like I didn't grow up in this perfect environment, but I had these character traits that would lead people to think, hey, we can do something here with this person. Well, same thing, like, hey, they have these character traits. They may not be perfect here, but I think we can get them going in this direction. And the ones that don't. And I would tell you that I fire very few people. Most of the people who don't work out, they come to that conclusion on their own.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know for sure, but with the military, it's like you give an order, there's no, you know, it's like you follow that order. Whereas in civilian world, I can say no. I could say, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm leaving. We have more of a choice and an out, where the military, and I could be wrong on that, but how does that work for you? And how did that translate for you, like in the, you know, dealing with civilians versus, you know, being in the military as a leader?
In the military, you often get like the knife hand. You will.
Yeah.
This is the order you will do. The great thing about the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, is in that organization, yes, there's rank, yes, there's title, yes, there's position, and yes, people will do things because you gave an order. But I'll tell you, when it comes to missions and getting the mission done, rank played less of a role in terms of you have warrant officers that are flight leads, and the warrant officer flight leads will lead the mission. and they'll brief the mission and they'll be responsible for that mission set. Me as a commander, I could be a pilot. Yeah, I'll be an air mission commander, but I'm flying in Chalk 2 as a pilot in the aircraft, and I may not even be the aircraft commander. The aircraft commander could be another warrant officer. So you have to learn how to influence by persuasion, being viewed as a competent contributing team member, not just by virtue of your rank. And so what I share with folks is, and what I found in the private sector and talking to other friends, and we've all experienced, we talk about it, out here, nobody tells people what to do generally by giving an order. And in fact, I find that nobody really tells anybody what to do. And so there's an implied nature to things. And what I tell folks is like those veterans who transition, or just anyone out in the private sector and civilian world, those who picked up on the implied nature of what needs to happen do very, very well. And those who don't pick up on the implied nature of what needs to happen, or they choose to ignore and they go, well, nobody explicitly told me what to do, so I'm not doing it, they don't do as well. And so I look for folks with the character traits that kind of give me an indication that they're going to pick up on the implied nature of what needs to happen, and they're going to run with it. And I find that at our store, and just I look at a lot of my friends' stores, at Chick-fil-A, you have a lot of really resourceful team members, and it's a culture. Like they don't necessarily always come. Everybody goes, where do you find these people and how do you train them? I'm like, no, like they come from every walk of life, just like the people you hire. We have this culture that we inculcate them to, and they either decide to get on board and stay on the train, or they hop off the train. But again, I go back to the like folks that can get the implied nature do very well. And our team does very well with that.
So getting back to the 160th, what made you go 160th actually? Let's start that. I didn't even get that question.
When I was in college ROTC, the book Black Hawk Down came out. Not the movie, the book. And I read it and I was like, I want to do that. Again, it was, I'm a type A go-getter type personality. I wanted to fly Apache helicopters and on the conventional side, and I did. Then I wanted to go to the 160th when the opportunity presented itself. It was just, again, that next level of pushing myself. And then not to say, let me be clear on something, not to say like, oh, if you didn't go to the 160th, you weren't this great Army aviator. But I looked at the mission set. I looked at the customer base that they worked with. I looked at the mindset, just talking to folks who had been in the unit, and I was like, I want to be a part of that. I think that's a really good fit for me. And it was a really good fit for me. And to be honest, I don't know if I would have stayed in the Army for a career long-term had I not gone to the 160th. And again, not a condemnation of like, oh, if you didn't go special operations, you get out because it's terrible. It's just, I'm not sure that what was ahead of me is what I really would have wanted to do. Like I got to do exactly what I wanted to do for a 20-year career in the Army. And that's rare. And so I'm grateful for it. But it was that challenge of like getting selected, making the cut, making it through Green Platoon, making it down into a unit and being an operational pilot, staying in the unit long term. And you don't know all that stuff when you're first applying. You're like, I just want to go here and be a pilot in this unit. But it was the nature of like, hey, this is elite. You're handpicked to go here. And then there's a really great opportunity to excel. Because I'll tell people like the 160th will make you better. And I'll share this with you. People ask about my experience in the 160th. And I said, hey, I want to say something to you that not to discourage you about the unit. But I was like, I never felt like the 160th was fun. It was not fun. It was hard. It was stressful. It was white knuckle flying. And the expectations were high. The margin of error was next to none. And it was high adventure, high stress, high anxiety a lot of the time. We're talking about overseas combat mission sets and everything. I said, but here's what I'll tell you. If you want to be a better soldier, if you want to be a better leader, and if you want to be a better aviator, you need to go to the 160th because it made me better. I would not be where I am today and who I am today without service in the regiment.
I love how you're all about your mission and your values, and you know that, and then you allow yourself to be led to what's gonna answer that for you. When did you learn and cultivate and come up with your own missions and values?
So I think a lot of them were innately there. Even like when I was a troubled youth, I was still like a good kid at heart. I just didn't know what I didn't know, and I maybe didn't have the right mentors and folks around me yet. Innately, some of those things were there. The Army has its value set. The Marine Corps has its value set. So you start to learn those values as you mature in the service and everything. But I spent a lot of time. I always tell folks, so I went through the assessment and selection process for the 160th, and part of it you had to like fill out, hey, these rank order these 14 character traits, and what do you think's number one? And I really got to think about that. And I thought integrity has to be number one. It all starts there. I would tell you that, yes, I went through that selection process, and you don't remember as much because you're getting beat up the whole time and like it's just coming at you really fast. But years down the road, I was a executive officer in the unit. And the unit was at Fort Campbell, and all the assessments and selections would be at Fort Campbell. The executive officer, now as an executive officer of a battalion, you could sit on the boards. And so we all had X amount of boards. Well, some of our other units, they were on the East Coast, West Coast. Some of the XOs would be like, hey, Mike, can you save me some time? Can you help sit my boards? I can't make it from the West Coast just to be there for a day of boards. I'm like, sure, no problem. So I sat tons of boards. Man, I want to say hundreds, but it was a lot. I sat a lot of boards as an executive officer. And then I would sit boards as a regimental S3 as well. And so I had a lot of time sitting boards and just hearing different folks on the boards and talk about the character traits and talk about, because you would talk about the candidate when they weren't there before they came in the room. Then you'd kick them out of the room. You'd talk about them some more. And then you'd bring them back into the room. This is like at the end of the assessment and selection week when they're in the board. And I just got to spend a lot of time between the regimental psych and just folks. And I just really started thinking about these character traits that were important to me. So then when I got done being a regimental S3 and I went to be the professor of military science at Clarkson University for 2 years before I came back to the unit for battalion command, I spent a lot of time, hey, I'm selecting leaders for the Army. Like I'm selecting leaders like kids coming from high school interviewing with me, kids coming off the street in college, hey, I want to be in this ROTC program. And I spent a lot of time thinking about those leadership traits and what I saw that I thought was important to me that made me successful, and what I saw that made others successful, either through this assessment and selection process in the 160th or through the ROTC process as a professor of military science. And it's all opinion, but I got to form an opinion of the C3I. I'm like, hey, if they have character, compassion, and competence grows over time. There's like a base level of competence, and that grows over time. And they have integrity, you can kind of work with a lot of other things.
You talked about how it wasn't fun, but it made you a better person. And you talked about how, it's a lot of white knuckling, right? And Brandon mentioned this. What did he say? He said that the Night Stalker Creed, he mentioned, was like plus or minus 30 minutes, and that's it, or something like that. It's
no, not 30 minutes, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, I knew it was a 30 somewhere. 30 seconds, which is like, you're white knuckling the entire time if something is going wrong, right? And there's a lot of things that could go wrong. He mentioned he told some story about something that had to be fixed instantly and get them there, and it was delaying them, but they made it, right? And it's like, well. And he mentioned you're just surrounded by the best, right? But what is it like for you being in such a high stress, pressure situation? And was there something that you did for you to stay calm, stay focused? Because, that high stress level can impact performance, positive or negative. So was there something that you particularly did to help you stay calm and be focused on the mission?
So what was calming for me was the competence and commitment of everybody around me. That was always a calming, and the fact that I was a leader in the unit. When you're a leader in the unit, I could kind of talk to how you can almost use that as a coping mechanism as well, because you can compartmentalize and put your personal thoughts, feelings, and wants aside, or you're hey, insecurities aside, because I have to get through this because folks are counting on me here. Before I got to the 160th, I was always, I'm using this as an analogy, not but I was always the top performer. I was always the best guy. And when you get to the 160th, everybody's a top performer and everybody's a great guy. And I often did not feel like I was the best person in the room. In fact, I never felt that way in the 160th. Prior to the 160th, I felt that way a lot. So it'll humble you in that way, but it's reassuring because like there's triple checks. There's all these things you do. And then at the end of the day, there's someone who's going to check you. Hey, sir, watch your altitude. Hey, sir, watch, like someone's always going to check you and they're not afraid to check you because of your rank. I always took solace in that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd feel that way too in terms of, I like the fact that people weren't afraid to, you don't hear this very often with those that are on the show. And also in civilian life too, when someone is above you in the work field, there's no critique on you, or like not even critique. It's not really a critique, but just like looking out for you. Like, hey, like, we got to, like you said, check the altitude or, all that stuff. And I just think that that's something really special that really I would say helps you.
Your subordinate leaders, they were encouraged. I mean, I was a numbered battalion commander in the unit. Like, you're getting down to a very small fraction of folks that are getting selected for these jobs. All through my time, whether it was platoon leader from battalion commander, there was somebody always willing to speak truth to power. Hey, sir, what are you doing here? Hey, sir, I think we're messing this up. Like, there was never like a public shame or embarrassment thing, but whether it was my sergeant major, my first sergeant, a flight lead, aircraft commander, there was always somebody willing to tell you where you had opportunity and where you can improve. And I never felt like it was from a place of malice. I always felt like it was a place of care. Folks generally liked me and they wanted to see me do well. And if I did well, the troops were cared for and the unit did well. So it was always from a good and caring place, even if like it wasn't the softest approach. Because, in that unit, like, it's not the softest approach. So even if it wasn't the softest approach, I always knew it was from a good and caring place, if that makes sense.
I have to ask this question because Brandon mentioned this, and he said, he had a little bit of trouble with going into civilian world, and he's just so used to being so direct and people being so direct to him that when you come into this world, he's like, I can't do that at my job, but sometimes it just kind of comes out, and I don't mean it that way, but you do, but you don't, you have to talk differently. Like you said, like people are a bit more sensitive in civilian world. So how was that an issue for you, especially like where you're working now?
Fortunately, I had a 2.5 year simmering cooling off period. After leaving the regiment, I was a junior ROTC instructor for 2.5 years. And I'm always say I'm grateful that I didn't get the opportunity to go in Chick-fil-A right away. One thing I said, in a unit like that, like I would tell you that expletives get thrown around a lot, 4-letter words get thrown around a lot. It was actually pretty surprising to me how quickly that part of it faded away. Like it wasn't that I was running around swearing or anything like that after I got out. That actually melted away very quickly, which I'm grateful for. Not that I was always the biggest swearer, but you're in an environment where just swear words are being thrown around all the time. One of the things I told my team when I first took over at the Chick-fil-A is I said, hey, you will find no one will care as much as I do. And I was like, I'm going to care for you. I'm going to care for your well-being. I was like, but sometimes I can be very direct. And I was like, I just want you to know that up front. And it can sound like I'm being short. It's just kind of this thing that was instilled in me, and I don't mean anything by it. And it was funny, now that my team, they know and they trust me, it's my leadership team, and they joke about it now. And they were like, yeah, like the first couple months, like you were never mean, but like you were really direct. We joke about it now because we get it and they understand my background a little bit better. And I'm just thankful. And as time goes on, it's been 5 years now. So I'm not nearly, that stuff fades away, and I'm glad it does. I'm not nearly as direct or as abrupt or, abrasive at times as I was then. But it is something you have to be cognizant about, especially when you're first making that transition, because it does take a little bit of time. And to Brandon's point, like that is a real thing, so I'm sensitive to it, even though I know I'm better at it, but I am sensitive to it. And my GM, she kind of told me, she goes, at first, she was like, is he being passive aggressive with me? No, she wasn't my GM yet. She was one of the leaders. And now she's grown me for a couple of years. And then she was like, no, he's not mean like that. I can't quite put my, and she was like, he's very direct. But now she was like, you're not anything like that anymore. So it's just, you can grow. And that was one of the things like you do have to shed a little bit because people don't communicate. That's the one thing, Gina, to your point. People out here, when I say out here, it's about the private sector or it's about on the civilian side, people do not communicate with each other the way we communicated. And we don't take offense to it. No, this is just normal conversational tone in the unit. But out here, like it can be very offensive. People do not communicate that way.
I'm laughing now because I hired somebody to do something for my company, and I gave a video. Like, I showed him exactly what I wanted. I edited a video together to make it so easy for you to follow. And then he sent it back, and I was like, did you watch the video? And I don't mean, I'm not saying it in a condescending tone, but did you watch the video? Because it doesn't look like it. And then as we're talking some more and I'm going through all the points and what he didn't do, he was like almost like gave me my money back and wanted to quit because I was so direct and abrasive. And he's like, can we just talk softer? And I was like, oh, you know what? Sometimes I'm a little bit direct, and I don't mean to be. Like, it's just the environment that I grew up in. Again, nothing like the military one, but it's the same thing. It's like, we don't have time to soften it, just get it done and go there. And I realized, like, I have to change my tune in a bit and adjust. And it's amazing that, and I also think that for yourself, like, from what I'm hearing, you're really good at being open and listening to others, which is obviously where that caring comes into play, and then changing yourself for the environment, which I think not many people have. They're a bit more rigid or more closed. Like you said, I think one of your biggest strengths that allows you to be not just an awesome team leader, but clearly effective communicator is that it sounds like you really also listen to your team as well.
No, it's important. You got to have a learner's heart, kind of close up what you just said. It's all about having a learner's heart. I will share this story with you. I set up a 401k program for my restaurant, which I'd never had one before I took over. We want folks to know that this is a viable career path for them with, benefits. And we set up a 401k, and I was working with the third party administrator, and I was working with the financial advisor, and there was just some stuff that wasn't right. And so I wasn't rude, but I just responded back, and I was going point by point, pointing out everything with red ink. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. This isn't right. This is how I want it. And this was in the email. Just sent it back. I didn't think anything of it because that's just kind of how, as a regimental S3 or dealing with somebody, you want to get this stuff so folks can move on. The financial advisor was like, at first I was kind of like, this guy's pretty intense, like, and he's pretty serious about things. And then our marketing, we have an area marketing firm that does a lot of marketing for the restaurants, the Chick-fil-A restaurants in our market. And Kevin, who got to know me, who's friends and goes to church with this financial advisor, he was like, do you know Mike's background? And he was like, no. And he explained it to me. He goes, oh, it all makes sense now. And he kind of jokes with me. And now we're good friends, but he jokes with me. And same thing, Susie, who works at PR at Chick-fil-A, we did this event for this military thing at Walter Reed. And same thing, I responded. She sent some stuff, and I said, Susie. And I responded back like point by point by point by point. And I think she was a little taken back because it wasn't face-to-face. It was in an email. And I think she showed it to some folks, and she's like, do you know this guy? And they're like, oh, Mike's a really nice guy. Oh, here's his background. And then Susie got to know me, and Susie and I are great friends now. Like, I'm going to see her next week at our convention, and we're going to have lunch together. We're like great friends now. So that was the other thing I realized too. It wasn't just my face-to-face communication, which I could fix pretty easily. It was how I communicated via text or email when the context of my demeanor isn't there either, that you have to think about on the other side as well.
It's really great that you can get that feedback and make the adjustments, because again, not everybody has that quality. And I think that really helps with making you as successful as you are. And I want to just circle back to 160th and the white knuckling. I just think that's such a great visual. Like, that's why I keep repeating that one. But How do you was there ever moments of failure, and if so, like how do you handle those moments, and what does that what did that teach you? Do you have any story with did that happen?
Yes, and I can expound upon the story that Brandon shared with you when you
Please,
asked about and
please.
he talked about my friend Mike and this crash. And I was flying. I was the Mike flying the aircraft with another Mike that crashed. And not to get belabor the whole mission set, but we were going after a target in Afghanistan, and we had to land 2 rotor disc separation. It was one of those like high impact. Everything's going to happen really fast. We had our customer base was the Army's National Mission Force unit. So we had a troop from the National Mission Force, and we were going after this target. Ultimately, there's pilot error involved, but there's more to it than that. We had gotten some imagery that showed the landing area clear. Not that the imagery was bad, but the battle space owner built a, no kidding, like Olympic quality volleyball court, if you will, in this landing area within the time that imagery was taken and the time we went to go hit the target. I mean, when I say like big metal poles anchored in and like concreted into the ground. And when we were going in for landing, we flew into that and rotor discs started eating up on the poles. Next thing you know, we crashed the helicopter and we're flipped over. There's a lot to this story. I remember initially like the fear of like, I think I'm the only one alive. I remember calling out right seats up and nobody else responded back to me. And in a moment of frustration, I punched the side of the aircraft. I screamed an expletive, right seats up, just out of frustration. And that's when I finally started to hear people come to and start calling out over the ICS system that they were with me during that crash sequence. And I didn't fully admit this till the end of my career, until later. I did lose consciousness at one point from all the banging and my head banging and everything. And like, I mean, I'm eating dirt. It was pretty bad, but I didn't want to admit it at the time because I was afraid that I would get grounded. And then I was afraid that I would lose command of my company and I'd be taken away from the unit. All those fears that you hear, that was a real fear for me. But I also remember that the unit, we consolidated the injured and all this stuff, and the unit actually went and prosecuted the target while we were there. And then there was this big coordination effort, and it's a long story. And I remember I got to a satellite phone and called back to my commander overseas to kind of let him know what was going on. And I had a pretty good concussion. And then later he told me, everything you said to me was correct, but you said it backwards. If you meant to say left, you said right. Like I struggled to get words out. And I thought I was coherent in saying everything, but he could hear that I wasn't. But he allowed me to continue the mission and the recovery because I was no longer in a flying position. And he didn't tell me he allowed me. I know he allowed me to do it because I didn't get at the controls of an aircraft after the crash. I continued on the mission in another aircraft, but I was in the jump seat, not flying, working radios. Again, it allowed me, my place as a leader allowed me to compartmentalize and kind of hide behind what had just happened, all the emotions of what had just happened. But in terms of compassion, I never forget when we got back, this utter feeling of failure. We crashed. We just destroyed this $84 million aircraft. But all the things of Brandon and his team, of everybody else to recover that aircraft. I never forget talking to, and I won't mention his name because he's still a general on active duty. He wasn't a general then. He was a lieutenant colonel. He's a general on active duty still. His name was Al. And Al, I remember saying to me, again, reinforcing his belief in me as a leader over ICU, because he was in a different part of the country, but we're over VTC like this. And he's like, this is a combat loss. It was nothing but support because I could, obviously he could tell that we were all beating ourselves up about this. There was nothing but support. And he was a battalion commander for another unit within the unit, but he was our commander overseas. I called my commander up and I remember just apologizing profusely. And his name's Phil, and he's a general on active duty. He was a lieutenant colonel at the time. And he was like, Mike, stop. He goes, I want you to know how proud of you I am. And like, it's kind of emotional for me to tell this story. So I'll kind of stop there. But I remember him talking about how you continued the mission and you stayed in the aircraft. All those things for me was another thing of compassion. Like here I am thinking that, hey, this could end my career in the unit. And lo and behold, I went on to be a battalion commander, commanding that same battalion that Phil was in command of. So it didn't limit me in any way. And it showed that like, hey, this wasn't just your mistake. It was all of our mistake. And I remember Al beating himself up probably more than I did. The fact that he felt guilty that his headquarters gave us the imagery that showed everything was good when it wasn't. And, I didn't put any of that on him. I understood this. So we all tend to be harder on ourselves than we should be in that organization. But what I will tell you is I learned a lot about compassion. And what really drove it home for me was the ground force, who like they believe in a lot of ways like we're like supermen. Like they believe like they are fully protected and under this cloak of armor when they're in our aircraft. Like almost like, hey, nothing's going to happen to me because I'm flying with the Night Stalkers. I remember the guilt of feeling like I let them down. And I never forget, they all came in to our planning area, because their planning area is like right next to ours and just in another like tent talk, if you will. And they came over to our planning area post mission. I mean, this is hours later because a lot had transpired. And I remember them embracing us and hugging us. And I remember them saying, hey, we trust you guys. We believe in you guys. And there is nobody else in the world we'd rather have flying us. You just can't quantify that. And I'll just tell you, you know, my Greek allergies acted up a lot. And when I think back on it, my Greek allergies start to act up a little bit again. But there was a lesson in compassion there.
Thanks for, you know, showing us more to that story and then expanding on it. I really like the lessons that you came from that too, because you're right. Like we tend to be way harder on ourselves too, and allow that failure to eat at us, and the fact that you were able to, you know, compartmentalize and also complete the mission and all that stuff just is not just a testament to you, but also the people around you as well. What do you have for us, all the listeners out there, that we could do or should be doing on a daily basis to develop that grit, that resilience, you know, to face those challenges, or to go out and do something that might scare us, that will scare us?
I'm not the expert on this, and I don't profess to be. And I'm not going to say, do these things and this is going to happen. But what I would tell you is have a really good moral compass that guides you, and do the little things, because the little things lead to big things, and success begets success. Everybody's always looking for the like overnight answer or the quick fix. And I would tell people there's no overnight successes. There's no quick fixes here. But if you're diligent and you do the little things really well, you're going to start to do the big things really well. And then you're going to do things repetitively, and it becomes instilled in you, and it's part of your nature and not just something you have to think about. And then I would say have a really good understanding of what it is you're for, and not just what you do. In the 160th, you know, Brandon talked about plus or minus 30 seconds. We talked about the regimental creed, Night Stalkers don't quit. Within the creed, there's a long written creed, right? But we say Night Stalkers don't quit, plus or minus 30 seconds. And so I would tell people, yeah, in the 160s, we did helicopters. We flew helicopters. Someone said, well, what do you do? Well, I fly these black helicopters. I do this, you know, at Chick-fil-A, I sling chicken and I make chicken and we do this. But what are you for? And so like in the 160th, we serve with the memory and pride of those who come before us, for the love to fight, fought to win, or rather die than quit. Like there was a really good understanding of what you were for. Be grounded with a moral compass, have a really firm understanding of what you're for, not just what you do, because those are two separate things, and do the little things really well and do them repetitively. Because if you can't do the little things well, and you're like, oh, that's not important, that's practice. We're talking about practice, right? If you can't do the little things really well, you're never going to do the big things really well. And if you just try to skip to the big things, you're just going to be sloppy, and it's not going to land very well.
This was a fantastic interview. I loved talking with you. Anyone that's in the Virginia area, stop in the Chick-fil-A and say hi to Mike and the team. And I'm just so grateful to have you on the show. You were fantastic, and I just feel honored to have you. Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure, and I truly hope that I answered your questions.
Did an incredible job. Yeah, no, you went above and beyond. Thank you so much, and everyone that's listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe, become a Substack member. Everything on the Substack is completely free to help you build your mental fitness and your resilience. And I'll see you guys all next week. Thank you.